This happened when I was a kid. Ironically, it was the first time I was ever left home alone. I remember the year was 2006. I lived with my parents and an older sister. Our house was in a pretty normal neighborhood. There were a bunch of houses on our street, and the yards were decent sized but not that big. The street was usually pretty quiet. Mostly only people who lived there would drive down. On this night, my sister was at her best friend's house, and my parents were going to a movie with friends. I didn't have anything going on, so I was left home alone. Normally, my older sister would be left home with me, but not tonight. I was a little bit nervous, to be honest, because I was afraid of the basement and really shy in general, but overall, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. My parents were only going to be gone for maybe 3 hours. From the moment my parents left, everything went well for the first hour or so. I was sitting on the couch channel surfing when there was a knock at the front door. Suddenly, my heart started pounding. I would never answer the door by myself, and I didn't know who could be there. Also, it was like 8 o'clock at night and dark out. I stayed where I was, and after a 10-second pause or so, whoever was there knocked again. I was too scared to even get up and look out the window to see who was there. Our blinds were all closed in the living room, which I had done myself after my parents left. This is the exact kind of situation that I was afraid of. The person knocked again. They seemed like they really wanted somebody to answer the door. I just wanted them to leave though. After knocking one more time, finally it seemed to stop for good. I was glad they stopped, and now finally I decided to go look out the window. I got up and looked out, but saw nobody there. The front step as well as the driveway were empty, and I didn't see anybody in the street either. I felt a little better after this, and then returned to what I was doing. I had no idea who had been knocking or why, but all that mattered to me was that they were now gone. For the next 20 minutes or so, I stayed in the living room on the couch. Then I heard what sounded like something hitting up against the back window of the house. It seemed weird to me. I heard the noise for probably like 30 seconds. I decided to get up and see what it was. When I walked over to the kitchen, I saw the window where the noise was coming from, and at first saw nothing. Then when I got closer, I saw there was a man right on the other side in our backyard. I turned on the light, and the guy ducked down out of my view. I ran away after I saw him. I went all the way to my bedroom and got into my bed. When I got there, I covered myself with blankets and plugged my ears. I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't want to know what was happening. I remained there for probably another hour, too scared to move. I didn't hear anything and didn't allow myself to hear anything either. For all I knew, our house could be getting robbed. Finally, when I was able to feel well enough to take the blankets off, everything seemed fine. I didn't hear anything from inside the house. Just minutes later, my parents got home. When they were inside, I went to see them. Everything in the house was fine, and there was no sign of the man anywhere. The windows he had been at were still closed and not broken or anything. I told my parents about it, and they checked all around the house as well as outside. There was no sign of the guy though. I'm guessing that after the man saw me, he ran away and didn't come back. I think he was trying to break in though. Quite possibly he knocked to see if anybody was home, and when there was no answer, he figured the house was empty. After this experience, I didn't want to stay home by myself for a long time. Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone in a second-floor apartment building. The apartment building is fairly new, and I really like it. The place I live in has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. I was on my second movie of the night, and the time was about midnight. It was Saturday, so I didn't have work or anything the next morning. My apartment happened to be on the far end of the hallway, and it was right next to the stairs that people would occasionally use. The elevator was in the center of the hallway, which is much more common for people to use. I heard the door to the stairs open and then close. It sounded like somebody was walking by down the hallway, and I didn't think anything of it. But I realized soon that it sounded like more than one person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was a little weird, but I expected them all to pass by. It seemed like they all stopped right outside of my doorway though. Maybe they were going to the place across the hall from me. The apartment across the hall though was not lined up with my door but was a little ways down. I just got curious for some reason, so I paused the movie and got up. I walked over to the door and looked out. The people, what I saw shocked me. There were like 10 guys standing in the hallway right outside my apartment, and they were all facing my door. I was instantly creeped out. I didn't know who any of these guys were, and they were all wearing all black and had hoods on, so I couldn't see much of their faces. This was really bizarre to say the least. Nobody had knocked on my door though, and it didn't seem as though they were going to. They were just standing there. I considered for only a second opening the door and asking what was going on, but I thought better of it. I quickly walked away and decided to just ignore them. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable as long as they were all standing there. I was hoping and sort of expecting them all to move along and to keep walking away down the hallway. I listened for them to move away, but they didn't. I waited for a little longer before unpausing the movie, but I still didn't hear them walking away. The guys had to all still be there. I tried to distract myself by watching the film, but in doing so, I turned the volume down significantly. I didn't want the people outside to hear or know that I was home. As the movie played though, I still couldn't focus. It wasn't helping to distract me from the strange men standing outside my door. Then I heard what I was sure sounded like my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, and the only reason I had heard it was because, number one, I was already thinking about the guys at the door, and number two, my TV volume was now very quiet. This made me feel really creeped out, even more than I already was. I'd also started to feel like possibly I was in danger. I stayed where I was, not sure of what to do for the next probably 10 minutes. I didn't hear any other noises or anything. I got up to see if the men were gone, and I was really hoping that they were. When I got to the door and looked out though, they were all still there. I ran back as quietly as possible. I sat back down on my couch, and I had no clue what to do in this situation. I didn't think I could call the police for this. They were just standing in my hallway. Yes, I thought they'd tried opening my door, but it's not like they were trying over and over or banging on the door. Looking back, I probably should have, but I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. After maybe 5 more minutes or so, I went back to look again. This time when I looked out, they were all gone. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even heard them walking away or anything. I was so paranoid that I kept looking back at my peephole every 10 minutes or so. Luckily, I didn't see them. But before going to bed, I was so worried about it that I left my apartment and walked the hallways, just making sure that the men were gone. I went throughout the whole entire building just about without seeing them. After that, I was finally able to go to bed. By now, it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was really tired. I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, at some point, I was woken up in the night. I just remember waking up to the sounds of somebody knocking on my front door. They knocked about 2 times. After I woke up, I knew it was probably the same guys, and I was terrified. I stayed in my bed and didn't even bother to get up. What could I do? There was just silence. I was afraid they would break in or something. I couldn't believe that they were back, if that's in fact who was at the door. I really didn't want to get up and check though. I lay there in my bed for the longest time. It was probably about 30 minutes or so. Finally, I looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 4 a.m. Then I got up and checked the door. Nobody was outside in the hallway though. Whoever had knocked was gone. I went back to sleep after that and heard nothing more since then. Everything's been fine. When I was a kid, my parents used to leave me home alone sometimes. Both my parents worked, and they stopped getting a babysitter for me when I was around 10. I'm an only child, so I got used to being home alone pretty quickly. I was able to make several foods for myself and have snacks, but most of the time I would just sit and watch TV or hang out in my room. The house that we lived in was 1 level and had a basement as well. There were 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms on the main floor, as well as the living room and kitchen. It wasn't a very big house, but it also was not tiny, and it never felt like we didn't have enough space. At the time of this story, I was probably about 12 years old. So one night, I was home by myself. I really don't remember where exactly my parents were that night, but they were both gone. My mom had cooked me some food before they left, so I had it while watching TV in the living room. Then I went into my bedroom afterwards. For the next hour or so, I just kind of hung out in there, playing on my Nintendo DS and watching the smaller TV that was in my bedroom. It was probably like 8:30 or 9 p.m. at this point, and it was completely dark outside. That's when I heard our sliding glass door opening. I was used to hearing that noise because my parents went in and out to the patio all the time. The sliding glass door was connected to the dining room area by the kitchen, and it was at the back corner of the house. We had a little patio with a table and a grill and stuff like that. It was like 5 seconds after I heard this noise that I realized it was strange. None of my parents were home, so who could have done that? We didn't have any neighbors who would just come over or anything like that, and I suddenly became very worried very quickly. I started to panic, and I didn't know what to do. This kind of a situation had never happened to me before, and in fact, I had never really thought about it being a possibility. The neighborhood was always quiet and calm, and it seemed just like any other to me. I tried thinking quickly of who would be there, but I couldn't think of anybody. My bedroom door was not completely closed either, but open about a foot. I thought about getting up and closing it, but I didn't want to make any noise, so I stayed where I was sitting on top of my bed. One thing I noticed though was that I didn't hear anybody walking around inside the house. We had wood floors in the living room and dining room, so I probably would have heard whoever was there walking. My TV was playing with the volume pretty low, so I knew I would have heard the footsteps. I sat there on my bed not moving, listening closely for any noise, but I didn't hear anything. After a few moments, I grabbed my TV remote, which was next to me, and turned the volume all the way down. I listened very closely for probably another 30 seconds to a minute. I still heard nothing. I wondered if I actually had heard the sliding door closed. I definitely had. This was really strange, but after not hearing anything for a while longer, I started to feel better. I was convincing myself that nothing was wrong. Soon, I decided that I would have a look for myself. I got up from my bed and walked over to the doorway. My bedroom led into the hallway, and to the right was the living room. The dining room and kitchen were not in view from the hallway. You had to walk through the living room and then take a right to get to it. After looking around in the living room and seeing nothing, I stepped out. I walked through the living room and then to the dining room and kitchen. Still, I didn't see or hear anybody. This made me think that nobody was there. When I looked to the sliding glass door, it was closed but not locked. Now, this was a little bit concerning, but nobody seemed to be inside the house. Possibly a neighbor saw that it was open and closed it or something. That was bizarre, but that was the thought that came to my head. I don't know why. I tried thinking if the door had been open or closed when I had been out in the living room and kitchen before. I couldn't remember though. To be honest, most of the time I wouldn't even notice. Maybe one of my parents had forgotten to close it or lock it. I walked over to the door and then I locked it. Then I looked around into the patio and backyard. Our yard was pretty small, but we did have a bit of grass and a few plants and trees. Everything seemed fine from what I could see, and after that, I walked back over to my bedroom. I really didn't know how to explain the bizarre sound that I heard, but I guessed that it could be nothing. After returning to my bedroom though, I decided to look outside to my backyard from my bedroom window. I usually had the window covered with blinds as it was on this night. I lifted them up and looked out. Everything seemed fine for what I could see. About right after this, I returned to my bed, but was thirsty and my water glass was empty. So I picked it up and headed to the kitchen to get a refill. After I walked to the fridge, I was filling my glass when I heard another sound. It was coming from the living room. Somebody was definitely in there, and I started to hear footsteps. The closest exit that I was near was the sliding glass door, and I sprinted for it right away. I unlocked it, opened the door, and ran out without even closing it behind me. I was probably the scariest I had ever been. I didn't see whoever was there at all, but I knew somebody was inside the house. When I got outside, I sprinted out of the yard and around the house to the street. There, I started running down the street just trying to get as far away from my house as I could. I'm not really sure where I was planning to go, but as long as I was away from my house, I felt safe. Luckily, at this time, I had recently gotten my first cell phone. I had it with me in my pocket, and I took it out and called my mom. When I told her what had happened, she said that she was calling the police and my parents would head home immediately. I'm pretty sure in the meantime, I just kind of walked around the streets of my neighborhood. Eventually, I got another call from my mom asking where I was, and when I told her, her and my dad were there within a minute or two to pick me up. I got inside their car, and we drove to our house, which had several police cars in front of it now. I waited in the car with my mom as my dad talked to the officers to note the situation. When he came back, he said that the guy who had been inside the house was gone. The police hadn't found anybody inside. However, the house had several things in it that were messed up. One of the blankets that was on the couch was now on the floor, and I hadn't put it there. The doors to my parents' bedroom and the basement were also left open and had been closed before. But surprisingly, nothing was stolen from the house at all. We all went back inside a short time later, and I was pretty scared for the rest of the night. The guy never came back though, and I never saw him again. I'm just glad that I left when I did and got out of there.